You need to gather your things and move to economy, where you truly belong." The icy voice of Lauren Parker, the 34-year-old lead flight attendant, tore through the stillness of the first-class cabin. Her words cut like a blade, pulling every pair of eyes toward Adrian Cole, 47, the black man in a sharp navy suit, seated in 1A. Adrian looked up, his laptop still glowing with lines of dense financial reports. His boarding pass lay right on the tray table, stamped in bold with the words, "First Class." He didn't need to prove anything, not to himself at least. But here, under eyes filled with doubt, it suddenly seemed meaningless. A mocking smile flickered across the face of Gregory Stanton, a 52-year-old white businessman in seat 3C. He raised his phone, camera ready, eager to capture the moment order was restored. In the arch of his brow, in the faint shake of his head, he had already convicted Adrian, a man who did not belong. Lauren tapped her finger on Adrian's armrest, the cabin light glinting off the cold silver of her wedding ring. "This seat is for paying passengers," she pressed, her disdain slipping through every syllable. Adrian drew a slow breath, humiliation burning in his chest like fire. Every muscle wanted to explode, to leap up and shout back at them. But he knew. Calm was the sharpest weapon. He calmly extended his boarding pass for the third time. "As I've said, this is my seat. 1A. First class." The gold Rolex on his wrist caught the light, but Lauren's eyes slid past it, still clouded with suspicion. "Sometimes the system glitches. We need to confirm you weren't upgraded illegally," she replied, her tone flat. But the contempt beneath it was unmistakable. Gregory seized the moment, raising his voice so the entire cabin could hear. "This is exactly what I've been saying. People sneaking into places they don't deserve, not paying, then gaming the system." The cabin grew suffocating. Other passengers stayed silent, but their stares carried judgment. Someone began live streaming. Someone else started tweeting. The outside world was bleeding in, the viewer count on 16. Year-old Chloe Nguyen's phone climbing from dozens to hundreds in seconds. Adrian's eyes flicked to his own phone. A new message from his CFO. "Private jet available if commercial doesn't work. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. He closed the alert quickly, letting no one see. With a single tap, the entire ordeal could end. But he remained still, arms folded, wearing a faint, meditative smile. Lauren bristled at his composure. She called sharply toward the door. "We have a situation in first class. Send someone up now." Minutes later, Helen Fisher, the 49-year-old gate supervisor, arrived with Officer Daniel Brooks, a 42-year-old security officer with a crackling radio at his hip. Helen glanced at Adrian, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Miss Cole, the system shows you purchased an economy ticket at 11:47 p.m. last night. This is not your seat." Adrian opened his phone and held out the email confirmation. 11:47, yes, but booked in F class. Clearly. His voice stayed level, though his eyes flared with restrained fury. Officer Brooks stepped closer, his tone even. "Sir, this can go quickly if you cooperate. No need to make it harder." From behind, Chloe whispered into her camera, "Oh my God, they're removing a black man from first class, even though his boarding pass is valid." Her live stream viewers spiked. 847, 1200, 1800. Gregory pushed into the aisle, phone aimed at Adrian, his voice smug. I fly over 200,000 miles a year with this airline. I deserve a quiet flight, free from this disruption. Adrian said nothing. He slowly closed his laptop, his hand trembling slightly on the lid, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back rage. He knew when to erupt, and he knew this wasn't the moment. The air grew thicker. 6 first-class seats sat empty, yet they insisted. He didn't belong here. Finally, Captain Arthur Mills, 61, stepped out of the cockpit. 40 years in the skies had taught him how to weather storms, but this one was different. It was born of contempt. What's going on here? Arthur asked, his voice firm with authority. Lauren quickly straightened her uniform. Captain, this passenger refuses to leave a seat that is not his. The online audience had surged past 3,200. Chloe whispered, Oh my God, even the captain is here. Are they really going to drag him out? Adrian sat still, his hands clasped tight, his gaze unnervingly calm. Inside, every heartbeat repeated the same command. Don't react with anger. Don't let them see weakness. He gave a faint smile, opened his contacts. At the very top, a single name. Jonathan Reed, CEO, Aerotech Airlines. His finger hovered over the call button. The cabin fell silent. Staff, passengers, security. All eyes were fixed on him. Live stream numbers exploded into the thousands. And everyone understood this story was nowhere near its end. The static crackle of Officer Daniel Brooks's radio shattered the tense silence. Unit 4, report on first class. We're 15 minutes behind. Resolve immediately. Daniel glanced at Adrian, his eyes carrying a warning. You have 2 choices, sir. You walk out on your own, or we escort you. His voice was low and firm, but there was unease underneath it. He knew this confrontation was being live-streamed. Thousands of eyes outside the cabin, watching his every move. At the back, Chloe Nguyen's phone screen ticked upward. 3,800, 4,200, 5,000 viewers. Comments flooded the feed. Clear discrimination. He obviously has a ticket. Are they blind? No way, look at him. He must have sneaked in. The first-class cabin had turned into a public courtroom, and Adrian was on trial before strangers who had never met him. Helen Fisher, the gate supervisor, squared her shoulders, her voice pitched high to cut through the noise. Mr. Cole, the company has the right to reassign seats when necessary. We have excellent seats available in extended business class, and you'll be well taken care of. Adrian lifted his eyes, dark and steady, the resolve in them unmistakable. There is no reassignment. This is the seat I purchased. I am sitting exactly where I belong. Helen's voice tightened. If you refuse, we will have to proceed under policy. Nearby, Gregory Stanton seized the moment. He angled his phone to capture the circle of 3 airline staff and a security officer surrounding a single man whose only act was sitting in his rightful place. Finally, someone is enforcing the rules, Gregory muttered loudly enough for his mic to catch. We can't let things fall into chaos. The sneer in his tone twisted deeper into Adrian's pride. Yet instead of lashing out, Adrian simply closed his laptop and rested his hand on its lid, a small motion that radiated control. Captain Arthur Mills narrowed his eyes, the silver in his hair catching the cabin lights, his presence solemn. He knew well, if this dragged on, they would lose their takeoff slot. "We have 12 minutes left to depart. This needs to be resolved." Helen jumped in quickly. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to comply." Arthur studied Adrian, then the ring of employees crowding him. 40 years of flying told him this was no ordinary passenger. The man sat too firmly, too calmly, as if even if the world tilted off its axis, he would not waver. Meanwhile, Chloe whispered into her camera, "Oh my God, viewers are at 6,000. They're really going to drag him out, and he's still sitting there, silent, not yelling, not moving." One comment scrolled across her screen. "That calm is scarier than anger. This man is definitely not ordinary." Officer Brooks lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Sir, don't make this harder. We can avoid a scene. All you need to do is stand." Adrian twisted the silver wedding band on his finger, then smiled faintly. "I paid for this silence with my own credit card. Seems like you're the ones making the noise." The simple reply jolted Helen. Gregory's jaw tightened, his phone clenched harder. Brooks lifted a brow, and for a split second he felt as though he wasn't facing a passenger, but a judge quietly waiting for the right moment to deliver a verdict. The radio crackled again. "Flight 447, status? Has the passenger been removed? We're closing the gate." Helen swallowed hard. Brooks gripped the radio tighter. Arthur folded his arms, his stare heavy. Chloe whispered to her audience, 8,000 people watching. This is exploding." Adrian opened his contacts once more. The name at the top glowed. Jonathan Reed, CEO, Aerotech Airlines. His finger slid, hovered over the call. Everyone held their breath. The staff, the guard, the captain, the passengers, the live stream. One single touch, and the entire game would flip. The first-class cabin fell into absolute silence, as if everything had been drawn into Adrian Cole's fingertip when he pressed the call button. The faint beeping tone echoed through the heavy stillness, stretched taut like a string about to snap. On the third ring, a familiar voice came through the speaker, calm yet commanding. "Adrian, you're calling earlier than I expected. How's the quarterly meeting?" The entire cabin seemed to explode in silence. That name dropped like a hammer. Jonathan Reed, CEO of Aerotech Airlines. A voice every employee knew from company meetings, training videos, and corporate broadcasts. Lauren Parker froze, her hand that had been pointing at Adrian suspended mid-air. Color drained from her face, as if the blood had vanished from her body. Helen Fisher stiffened, the company policy binder slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. Officer Daniel Brooks instinctively stepped back, his radio nearly falling from his hand. And Gregory Stanton, the businessman who had been recording with a smug grin, trembled. His camera caught his own face contorted in sudden confusion. Adrian smiled faintly, setting his phone on the tray table so the entire cabin could hear. "Jonathan, I'm sitting on your flight 447, seat 1A, first class, and it seems your team is trying to move me down to economy. They've decided I don't belong in the seat I paid for." Jonathan's voice turned sharp, his tone slicing through the air. "I'm sorry, Adrian. Did I hear that correctly? My employees are attempting to remove you from the first-class seat you purchased?" The cabin held its breath. Captain Arthur Mills instantly understood the magnitude of the storm brewing. In 40 years of flying, he had never witnessed a political and corporate hurricane form so quickly. He glanced around, seeing every crew member frozen like statues. "Miss Reed," Arthur began cautiously. "We had a small issue confirming the ticket." Jonathan cut him off, his voice grinding like steel. "Captain Mills, I am looking at the flight data right now from Central Operations. Seat 1A was purchased in full, $3,247 at 11:47 p.m. last night. Purchaser, Adrian Cole. What exactly is there left to confirm?" Helen's knees buckled as she stared at the floor. Lauren bit her lip until it turned white, her hands clenched so tightly they shook. Chloe Nguyen's live stream exploded, the viewer count skyrocketing past 12,000. Comments poured in like a flood. "Oh my God, he actually called the CEO! This is the biggest plot twist I've ever seen." Their careers just went up in smoke. Chloe whispered into her phone, her voice trembling. "You guys, he isn't just anyone. He's the biggest corporate client this airline has. I heard the CEO say it himself." Adrian rose slowly. Not to leave, but so that every eye could see the calm in his stance. He turned, scanning Lauren, Helen, Daniel, and finally Gregory, the one still recording, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "Jonathan," Adrian continued, "you should also know, right now, at least 3 passengers are recording, and 1 live stream with tens of thousands of viewers is broadcasting everything. The footage shows your staff surrounding a paying customer, preparing to drag him out of his first-class seat. And that customer happens to represent 23% of Aerotech's annual revenue." A deathly silence hung in the air. Jonathan's voice returned, each word landing like a verdict. "Helen Fisher, Lauren Parker, Daniel Brooks. Do you hear me?" The 3 flinched as if shackled by invisible chains. "As of this moment, you are suspended without pay. When this plane lands, I expect detailed reports on my desk." Lauren's legs buckled, nearly collapsing where she stood. Helen clutched a seat for support, her face ashen. Daniel lowered his head, sweat dripping down his temple. Adrian closed his phone, gave a small nod, and settled back into seat 1A. The cabin was so silent, no one dared to breathe. Only the hum of the air vents and the pounding hearts of employees who had just lost their careers filled the space. The air in the first-class cabin grew dense, as if the oxygen had been drained away. Every eye was fixed on Adrian Cole's phone, its screen still glowing. Jonathan Reed's final words still echoed through the cabin like a death sentence hanging over 3 airline employees. Adrian did not rush. Calmly, he opened the leather case on his table and drew out a thick folder, its cover stamped with the Williams Holdings logo. Every motion was deliberate, precise, as though he were preparing for a board meeting rather than a confrontation at 30,000 feet. "Jonathan," Adrian's voice was steady, but heavy with the weight of a gavel striking a bell. "Do you remember the contract we renewed last month?" On the other end came the sound of rapid keystrokes. Jonathan was pulling up data. Within seconds, his voice returned, sharp as ice. "Of course. $127 million annually. Williams Holdings is Aerotech's largest corporate client. That figure accounts for nearly a quarter of our entire business travel revenue. The first-class cabin erupted in audible gasps. Gregory Stanton nearly dropped his phone, the camera that was meant to capture the unmasking of a fraud, now recording the image of a man powerful enough to swallow an entire airline whole. Helen Fisher bowed her head, lips trembling. A moment ago she had been enforcing policy. Now she was staring down the end of her career. Lauren Parker gripped the armrest so tightly, her nails left deep marks in the leather. One thought pounded in her mind. I just tried to throw out the very customer who pays this airline's bills. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped back again, sweat soaking his back, a cold chill running down his spine. Adrian raised his boarding pass and turned it toward Chloe Nguyen's phone. The teenager, whose live stream now shook in her trembling hands. The bold print read, "First class, seat 1A. No debate," Adrian said slowly, each word cutting into the silence. "I purchased this seat. I paid in full. And my company is the reason you all still have jobs." Jonathan's voice came through the line, no longer warm but glacial. "I want everyone on that flight to understand. Adrian Cole is not just a customer. He is the man who helped design Aerotech's first-class policy. He is a member of our corporate advisory council. The very services you are using to deny him are the ones he helped create." The shock rippled even to Captain Arthur Mills. In 40 years of flying through storms, he had never seen a single revelation tear apart the entire belief system of a flight crew so quickly. Behind them, Chloe's livestream counter surged, 15,000, then 17,000 viewers. The comments exploded. 127 million! He didn't just buy the seat, he practically bought the airline. Harvard will be teaching this case study. Adrian closed the folder and let his eyes sweep across the people who had doubted him just minutes earlier. Lauren looked on the verge of tears. Helen seemed to be swallowing back humiliation. Daniel resembled a child caught red-handed. Gregory's face was flushed, his hands shaking as he realized his recording had captured his own downfall. Adrian drew a slow breath and said, "You thought I didn't belong in this seat, but the truth is, I am the reason these seats exist." On the other end, Jonathan Reed delivered his verdict with surgical precision. "Lauren Parker, Helen Fisher, Daniel Brooks, effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Upon landing, turn in your employee badges. There will be no negotiation. Captain Mills, I am authorizing you to ensure Adrian Cole is treated as this airline's highest honored guest for the remainder of the flight." Arthur lowered his head. "Understood, sir." Chloe's live stream surged past 20,000 viewers. In the cabin, no one dared to speak. Only the faint hiss of the air conditioning filled the silence, heavy with the weight of careers that had just crumbled. Adrian leaned back in seat 1A, a faint smile on his lips. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't slammed his fist. With a single call, the world had turned upside down. The air in first class was so heavy that every passenger felt as though each breath pressed down like stone on their chest. The crew stood frozen. The passengers whispered. Chloe Nguyen's live stream had already passed 2,000 viewers. The entire world seemed glued to the movements of the man seated in 1A. Adrian Cole lifted his cup of cold coffee, took a small sip, then set it back down with ease. The man who had been humiliated only minutes earlier had now transformed the airplane cabin into his own strategic boardroom. He pressed the call button again. Jonathan Reed's voice immediately filled the cabin, still cold, still sharp as steel. "Adrian, I've suspended them. But I know you. You don't just want an apology. You want more. Tell me, what do you need, so this doesn't destroy Aerotech today?" Adrian smiled faintly. This was the moment he had calculated. Not for revenge, but to force systemic change. He opened his laptop. The screen lit up with a slide titled "Systemic Change Requirements." He raised his head, his voice resonant and steady, each word striking like a gavel. "Jonathan, if Aerotech wants to keep Williams Holdings $127 million, 7 changes must be made immediately. 1. Company-wide bias reporting. No more hiding incidents at the branch level. Every act of discrimination must be logged directly with headquarters. 2. Monthly anti-bias training. Not token workshops once a year. I want consistent training, with testing, with consequences for those who fail. 3. Leadership bonuses tied to inclusion scores. If a region racks up multiple discrimination complaints, the regional director loses their bonus. Simple and clear. 4. Passenger Dignity App. Passengers must be able to report incidents instantly, with automatic escalation to the legal department within 24 hours. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the cabin. Lauren Parker stared down, her eyes red. Helen Fisher gripped her, now useless policy manual. Officer Brooks stared at his radio as if wishing to disappear. Adrian continued. 5. Annual contributions of $100,000. Not PR stunts, but long-term commitments to civil rights organizations within the transportation industry. 6. Anti-discrimination clauses in every contract. Corporate clients must have the right to terminate immediately if discrimination occurs. No penalties. 7. Quarterly public reports. All bias-related data must be published on Aerotech's website alongside flight safety reports for the entire world to see. Jonathan was silent for a long moment. The cabin was filled only with the sound of pounding hearts and the faint keystrokes on his end. Then his voice returned, low and heavy. "Adrian, what you're demanding will change the entire structure of Aerotech. But you know very well, we have no other choice." The cabin gasped. Chloe nearly shouted into her camera. "He's not just defending his seat, he's rewriting the airline's entire policy right here on the plane." Adrian closed his laptop and pushed it forward like a period at the end of a sentence. He leaned back in his seat, his voice calm yet commanding. "Jonathan, you have 2 hours. By the time this plane lands, I want signed documentation. If not, next week Williams Holdings will fly with Delta, United, or any airline that knows how to respect its customers." First class shattered into silence. No one dared move. The phone speaker still carried the voice of Jonathan Reed, no longer urgent, but now cold and resolute. "Adrian, you will have the signed document before this plane lands. I've already called in legal and HR. They are in an emergency session right now. Every condition you laid out will be drafted into an addendum, and I will sign it myself." First class sank into a suffocating silence. Only the soft hum of the air system remained, as if echoing the frantic heartbeats of those who had just watched their futures collapse. Lauren Parker lowered her head, both hands trembling, tears suddenly welling up. She remembered how arrogantly she had tapped her fingers on Adrian's armrest, every word she spoke cutting into his dignity like a knife. Now she was the one dangling over the fragile thread of her career. Helen Fisher clutched her policy manual, the book that had once been her shield of authority. Now it was useless, hollow. A lifetime of believing in the word regulation had crumbled in an instant because she had applied it to the wrong person in the wrong situation. Officer Daniel Brooks stood frozen, his radio shaking so hard it crackled. He felt as though he had been dragged into a play with no exit, and the only ticket out had slipped away. In the back row, Gregory Stanton scrambled to turn off his camera, fumbling to delete the recording. But it was too late. Chloe's live stream had already drawn more than 25,000 viewers, alongside thousands of other recordings from different angles. His face, with that smug smile, had already spread across the world, making him the symbol of blind arrogance. Chloe whispered breathlessly into her lens, her voice trembling but filled with excitement. "You guys, I can't believe this. A man who was dismissed just minutes ago is now forcing the CEO of an airline to change the entire system. This is history." Captain Arthur Mills was the only one still composed, but inside he knew. This moment had gone far beyond an in-flight incident. It was a turning point for the entire industry. He stepped closer to Adrian and gave a small nod. "Mr. Cole, on behalf of the crew, I apologize." Adrian returned the nod without anger or triumph. Only the calm of a man who knew the balance of power had shifted to his side. On the other end, Jonathan closed the call with a voice like iron. "Adrian, you will have the document before landing. As for the employees on this flight, they are suspended, and unless they survive retraining, they can consider their careers over. I promise you, this will be an expensive lesson for all of Aerotech." The line went dead. The cabin remained silent. Adrian exhaled slowly, then opened his laptop. The screen glowed with charts and data, as though he were simply returning to unfinished work. That image, a man calmly working while an entire airline trembled from a single call, burned itself into the memory of everyone present. Outside, social media exploded. Hashtags "half-returned flight," Evan, and "airline shame" shot straight to the top of trending lists. CNN, BBC, Fox, all began running the story. The image of Adrian, seated in 1A, calm as stone while surrounded by chaos, spread across millions of screens around the world. The rumble of the plane's engines filled the air, signaling the crew's final preparations for takeoff. But first class was no longer just a cabin. It felt like a miniature parliament, where every gaze and every breath revolved around the man in seat 1A. Adrian Cole sat quietly, laptop open before him, as if nothing had just happened. Yet the others could not pretend calm. Lauren Parker dabbed her reddened eyes with a tissue. Every detail replayed in her mind. The impatient tapping of her fingers, the condescending tone, the suspicious glance. Now each moment had become evidence against her, plastered across social media. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but her throat locked shut. Helen Fisher, sat frozen. After 20 years clinging to the rule book, she had never imagined the day her policy manual would become a punchline. She once believed regulations would protect her. Now they only exposed her rigidity and lack of humanity. Officer Daniel Brooks stood in the back, sweat pouring as if he had run a marathon. His thoughts turned to his family, to the mortgage still unpaid. One poor decision, and his entire life was unraveling. Behind them, Gregory Stanton clutched his phone, now powered off, his chest tight with shame. He had thought himself the judge, but had become the fool mocked by tens of thousands. Why did I sneer at him? He wondered. But the answer came too late. Meanwhile, Chloe Nguyen trembled with excitement. Her phone warned of just 12% battery, yet her live stream viewers had surged past 28,000. Messages poured in. "Don't stop. This is history." "Girl, you just created the most valuable live stream of the year." She had never imagined that pressing go live would make her a global witness to an upheaval unfolding mid-air. Whispers rippled through the cabin. A middle-aged man murmured, "We are sitting next to an earthquake." The woman across from him shook her head, her eyes fixed on Adrian. "No, this is a lesson." Adrian closed his laptop, his steady gaze sweeping over each face. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to justify himself. His silence now was the loudest voice in the room. He thought of the figure. 120 halls, $7 million. He thought of the 847 employees from his company who flew with Aerotech each month, of the thousands of trips logged in spreadsheets. But above all, he thought of his mother, the woman who once had to squeeze into the cheapest seats in economy, quietly enduring the scornful glances. If she could see this moment, she would smile, Adrian told himself. Outside, the sky darkened, while the cabin lights reflected across the faces of those who had just lost their careers and those who had just awakened. The world beyond still roared on social media. But inside this cabin, it was the storm of silence that left everyone breathless. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign chimed, followed by the calm voice of a flight attendant. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached cruising altitude. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The words sounded bitter. No one in first class could possibly relax. Everyone was still trapped inside the storm that had just erupted. Adrian Cole's phone vibrated. A new email appeared. The sender, Jonathan Reed, CEO of Aerotech Airlines. The subject line, "Commitment Agreement, effective immediately." Adrian opened it. A PDF filled the screen, bearing Jonathan's digital signature and Aerotech's official seal. Passenger Dignity app to be launched within 30 days. Mandatory monthly bias and inclusion training for all 23,000 employees. Regional executives will lose bonuses if discrimination incidents occur. Quarterly bias reports to be published publicly on the company website. Corporate contracts to include a termination clause triggered immediately by discrimination without penalty. Annual contributions of $100,000 to civil rights organizations. A complete review of all customer-facing procedures. And at the very bottom, one line, small, but carrying the weight of steel. This commitment takes effect immediately and will be announced internally within 24 hours. Helen Fisher trembled, stealing a glance at the screen, but too afraid to come closer. Lauren Parker covered her face with her hands as tears streamed down. She understood. This was a verdict, not just for her, but for everyone like her in the industry. Officer Daniel Brooks stared at the floor, his radio slipping from his belt, hitting the empty seat beside him with a sharp, hollow clatter. The sound echoed like the final punctuation mark on his career. Adrian finished reading, then slowly raised his head. His voice was calm, but it resonated through the cabin. You treated me as though I didn't belong here. But in truth, this moment has rewritten the way Aerotech must treat every passenger from now on. The cabin was utterly silent. Every gaze, filled with regret, fear, or admiration, was fixed on him. Meanwhile, Chloe and Gwen whispered into her live stream. You guys, this has gone beyond anything I ever imagined. I am watching an airline sign a policy overhaul while still in the air. The viewer count shot past 35,000. Comments poured in. This feels like a movie, not real life. He just turned a plane into the boardroom of an entire corporation. Captain Arthur Mills stepped forward, his voice low but steady. Mr. Cole, in 40 years of flying, I have never seen a passenger force an airline to change in mid-air. You didn't just reclaim Seat 1A. You reclaimed dignity for everyone who will fly after you. Adrian nodded, a faint smile flickering across his lips, even as a tide swelled within him. He thought of his employees, of the thousands of people who would no longer have to endure scornful glances when stepping into first class. Outside, the world was erupting. On social media, the hashtags #Flight447 and #Dignity in the air surged to the top of global trends. CNN flashed breaking news across its screen. Corporate client compels Aerotech Airlines to sign reform agreement mid-flight. The plane began its descent, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seat belts. We are preparing to land. Outside, a blazing red sunset spread across the clouds, breathtaking in its beauty. But inside the first-class cabin, no one had the heart to admire it. Everyone was still shaken after witnessing a single man's resolve in keeping his rightful seat force, an entire corporation, to change. Lauren Parker slowly stepped toward Adrian Cole, her eyes red, her voice breaking. Mr. Cole, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. I let prejudice blind me. And Adrian lifted his gaze, calm, but not cold. His voice cut through hers, low and clear. Do not say it to me. Say it to yourself. Ask how many times you have treated others the way you treated me today, and how many times you thought they would never have the power to fight back. Lauren froze, tears streaming down her face. She understood. Her apology now was not to salvage a career, but to salvage the humanity still left within her. Next came Helen Fisher, the gate supervisor, who had clung to policy to try and force Adrian from his seat. She stood trembling, clutching the useless rulebook to her chest. I relied on regulations to convince myself I was right. But the truth is, rules can never replace fairness. Adrian gave a slight nod. You placed regulations above people. But what are regulations, if not meant to protect human dignity? Helen bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. Finally, Officer Daniel Brooks stepped forward. He had been the firmest of them all, but now his voice faltered, heavy with remorse. I was following orders, but I should have known. Not every order is right. I am sorry, Mr. Cole. Adrian looked directly at him, his voice deep and steady. You wear a uniform. People look at you and see law. They see justice. If you use that authority to make someone feel small, then you betray both. Daniel lowered his head. His eyes clouded with tears. The three of them stood before Adrian like students called to the front of the class. They were no longer figures of authority, no longer hiding behind the masks of power. They were simply people who had stumbled in the face of truth. Adrian drew a deep breath, then spoke softly, yet his words echoed through the cabin. You may lose your careers, but more important than that, do not lose this lesson. I do not want to see another passenger endure what I endured today. If you truly regret it, then learn, change, and prove you are worthy of a second chance. The plane shuddered gently as it touched the runway. In the cabin, many passengers broke into applause, not because of the safe landing, but because they had just witnessed a journey that had changed history. Chloe, whose phone had long since died, whispered softly, as if only to herself. He didn't just keep his seat. He kept dignity alive for all of us. The plane screeched as its wheels touched the runway. A sharp jolt, then it smoothed out. Passengers exhaled in relief, but no one hurried to unbuckle their seatbelts as they usually would. Everyone knew they had just lived through a moment that would be remembered for a long time. When the cabin door opened, camera flashes burst immediately from the jet bridge. The press had been waiting. News had spread long before the plane landed. The name Flight 447 flooded Twitter, Facebook, CNN, and BBC. A reporter raised a microphone high. Mr. Cole, can you tell us what really happened on this flight? Adrian did not stop. He simply gave one short reply, enough to become a headline everywhere. No one should ever be made to feel lesser in the very seat they paid for, or in any space of life. Meanwhile, Lauren Parker, Helen Fisher, and Daniel Brooks walked out quietly, their heads bowed to avoid the cameras. They had once been enforcers of authority. Now they stood as symbols of the collapse of prejudice. They knew full well their images would appear on the evening news, not as exemplary employees, but as living examples of unconscious bias exposed. Inside the emergency boardroom at Aerotech headquarters, Jonathan Reed stood before dozens of senior executives. He declared, "Starting today, we are launching the Dignity in Flight initiative. No passenger, no matter who they are, what color their skin, or what they wear, will ever again be singled out because of bias. Flight 447 will be the beginning of this change." Shareholders were initially anxious, fearing reputational damage. But soon after, the market responded in the opposite way. Within 48 hours, Aerotech's stock rose by 4%, as the press praised the airline as a corporation willing to face its mistakes and reform immediately. Chloe Nguyen returned home, plugged in her phone, and saw her TikTok account had gained 250,000 new followers overnight. The clip of Flight 447 had been shared millions of times. The 16-year-old never imagined that a spontaneous live stream would make her the global witness to justice. Gregory Stanton's story was different. He was swept into a storm of criticism. Business partners turned their backs. His company faltered. For the first time in his life, Gregory was forced to confront a question he had never dared ask. How many years have I lived in the illusion that skin color and wealth gave me the right to look down on others? In the weeks that followed, the press called Adrian the man who rewrote airline policy from seat 1A. But he declined lengthy interviews. He left only one statement. This is not my story alone. This is a reminder that dignity is not a privilege. It is a basic right. 6 months later, Aerotech's first public report revealed complaints about bias had dropped by 78%. Passenger satisfaction scores had risen from 74% to 89%. Corporate contract revenue had increased by 15% thanks to renewed trust. And in Harvard lecture halls, a new case study entered the MBA curriculum. Flight 447, when dignity became an economic lever. On that sky-bound day, there was only one seat 1A. But from that seat, one man changed an entire industry. In the world of business and service, we often think that power lies in the seats of authority within boardrooms or in the profit figures on a balance sheet. But the story of Flight 447 proved that there is a greater form of power: human dignity. Adrian Cole did not need to shout, nor did he need to raise a fist. All he did was maintain his composure and put the truth on the table. That unwavering resolve forced a multi-billion-dollar corporation to change. It is proof that true power does not lie in noise, but in the ability to turn a moment of injustice into a catalyst for systemic reform. If you believe that dignity is not a privilege, but a fundamental right for every human being, press like and subscribe to continue following us in stories that expose injustice and affirm human value. And before you leave, post a comment with the simple phrase, "Quiet power," to show that you too believe in the silent strength that can change the world.